Let me tell you something, and I want you to listen the way you'd listen to an old soldier in a bar who suddenly goes quiet. Because that's how I tell it now. Quiet. Even after all these years. I was there when they bought it. I was the one who sold it to them. And if I could go back, I don't know if I'd stop myself. I think about that a lot. Whether I'd reach across the counter, grab that human by his cheap synthetic collar and say, don't take it, walk away, buy a freighter, buy anything else, buy nothing. But I didn't know what I was selling. None of us did. None of us knew what a human was back then. Not really. My name doesn't matter to you. You couldn't pronounce it anyway. The closest you'd get in your mouth sounds is something like VESHK, so call me that. I worked the salvage exchange out at Harrow's Drift, which was the kind of station you only ended up at if your luck had run out somewhere better. A GREY ring of metal orbiting a dead star. No light from that star. It had burned out long before my grandmother's grandmother was hatched. It just sat there, a black coin in the dark, and we orbited it because the orbit was stable and the docking fees were cheap. That's the whole reason Harrow's Drift existed, cheap. We sold junk, that was the business, ships that had died, engines that had given up, hulls so old the registries had forgotten them. The galaxy is enormous and old and it leaves a lot of corpses and somebody has to pick the bones. That was us. The bone pickers, the scrap dealers, the bottom of the bottom. You learn things doing that work. You learn that everything dies. Empires, fleets, captains, ships. They all come through a place like Harrow's Drift eventually, cut into pieces, weighed and sold by the ton. I'd watched a QEL battle cruiser that once burned a whole moon get melted down into hull plating for cargo barges. I'd watched the throne yacht of a dead queen get sold for the value of its gold fittings. Nothing is sacred at the scrapyard. That's the lesson. Everything becomes mass eventually. So I wasn't sentimental. Understand that. I'd handled 1,000 wrecks and felt nothing for any of them. Then the VHA came in. It came in on a tow. I remember the day because the recyclers were running and the whole station smelled like burnt metal and ozone, that sharp taste you get behind your teeth. The recyclers always ran. They never stopped. The Drift digested its dead around the clock. I was at my counter, doing what I did, which was mostly nothing. Drinking something warm. Listening to the hull tick as it cooled and heated, and the manifest came across my console with a soft chime, and I almost ignored it. Then I read what it was. The VHA. You don't know that name. Of course you don't. But back then, in my part of the galaxy, every child knew it. The way you might know the name of a famous shipwreck or a battle your ancestors lost. The VHALSUN was a warship, an old one, a THRENNIC dreadnought from the THRENNIC hegemony, which was an empire that had already crumbled to dust before I was born. Here is the thing about the THRENNIC. They were the strong ones, the old strong ones. For 3,000 years they ran the spiral arm with an iron claw and nobody crossed them and nobody wanted to. Their warships were legends. The VHALSUN was supposed to be one of the worst of them, a planet killer, a thing that showed up in your sky and your sky was the last thing you ever saw. And then the hegemony fell, the way all of them fall, slowly and then all at once, and the great ships scattered and most were lost, and the VHALSUN. The VHALSUN drifted. Dead, gutted, for 111 years. Somebody had finally found the hull tumbling in deep space, way out past the charted lanes, and they'd towed it in to sell it. To me, because it was scrap now, just mass, just an old GREY ghost. I went down to the holding bay to look at it. I had to. You don't get to touch a legend twice in your life. It filled the bay. I want you to understand the size of it. The holding bay at Harrow's Drift could swallow a small moon's worth of freighters, and the VHALSUN nearly touched both walls. It was long and low and wicked-looking, even dead, even gutted. The hull was a COLOUR I don't have a clean word for, a kind of deep oil dark that drank the floodlights instead of reflecting them. There were old battle scars all down one flank, craters where something terrible had hit it long ago, and the metal around those craters had melted and refrozen into shapes like screaming faces. It was beautiful, I'll admit that. It was beautiful the way a predator is beautiful when it's finally been killed and you can finally walk up to it without dying. And it was empty, that's what struck me. I'd boarded a lot of wrecks. They always had something left, a stink of old crew, a flicker of dead screen light, a memory of life. The VHALSUN had nothing. It had been picked clean 100 years ago by whoever found it first, then abandoned, then found again. Every weapon stripped, every reactor pulled, every gram of value already gone. What was left was the hull, just the hull, the bones. The most famous warship in the history of my region of space, and all that was left to sell was the skeleton. I priced it as scrap, by the ton, the way I priced everything. And then I put it up on the exchange, and I waited for somebody to buy the bones of a god. Nobody wanted it. That's the part people forget when they tell this story now. They tell it like the humans showed up and snatched a treasure out from under us. That's not how it went. Nobody wanted the VHALSUN, not the QEL, who WOLD melted it for plating, not the brokerage, who buy anything that turns a coin, not even the scrap cults who worship dead warships as holy relics. You want to know why? Because of the story. Everyone in my arm of the galaxy knew what the VHALSUN was, and the trouble with a legend is that the legend follows the bones. The THR and NIC were gone, but their reputation wasn't, and there's an old superstition that the great THR and NIC ships were cursed, that the spirits of the worlds they killed still clung to the hulls. Stupid. I never believed it, but belief is a market force whether you share it or not. Nobody wanted a famous cursed warship sitting in their dock. Bad luck, bad press, bad sleep. So the VHALSUN sat, day after day, the most legendary hull in the sky, and it just sat there on my exchange listing, gathering dock fees, costing me money to keep. My supervisor, a fat, anxious creature named OTHOK, who sweated a kind of GREY paste when he was nervous, which was always, came down to lean on me about it. Sell that thing, he said. VSHK, sell it, it's eating us alive. Nobody's bidding. Then drop the price. It's already at scrap. Then drop it below scrap, he wiped paste off his brow. I don't care, pay someone to take it, I want that hull gone before the audit. So I dropped the price below the value of the metal. And that's when the humans came. I'd heard of humans. You have to remember what year it was and where we were. The humans were new, brand new. They'd come crawling out of their corner of the galaxy maybe. Oh, what was it then? Maybe 40 standard years before, in ships that the brokerage openly laughed at. Slow ships, ugly ships, riveted together out of materials we'd stopped using 1,000 years prior. The first human ship anybody saw out our way had an actual chemical rocket bolted to it as a backup. A chemical rocket, like cave things. We laughed. Everyone laughed. The official position galaxy-wide was that humans were harmless, backward, charming even in a pathetic sort of way. They were good for cheap LABOUR and odd cargo runs and the kind of dirty, dangerous salvage work that nobody respectable wanted to do. They had no fleet to speak of, no empire, no fangs. That was the official position. I'm going to tell you about the day the official position died. It died at my counter. I had a front row seat. There were 3 of them. They came off a hauler so battered I'd have priced it as scrap myself if they'd offered it to me. It had a name painted on the side by hand. By hand, with a brush, you could see the streaks, and the name was Second Chance, which I thought at the time was the saddest, most human thing I'd ever seen. A second chance, as if the universe gives those out. The one in front was small. They're all small, humans, but this one was small even for them. A female. Hair going GREY at the edges. She walked with a limp she didn't try to hide and a stare she didn't try to soften, and she came up to my counter and put both her little hands flat on it and looked up at me. "You've got a THRENNIC dreadnought for sale," she said. Her translator was old and crackly and a half-second behind her mouth, so the words came out of her and then arrived to me like an echo of a thing already happening. "The V-Hull soon, hull only, we want it." I almost laughed. I'm not proud of that, but I almost laughed in her face. This little gray-edged human, off her hand-painted bucket of a ship, wanted to buy the most famous warship in the spiral arm. It was like a sand flea asking to buy a mountain. "You know what that is," I said. "I know exactly what it is," she said. "That's why we want it." Behind her stood the other two. A big one, big for a human, which is to say barely my chest height, with arms like loading cables and a face that had clearly stopped a few fists in its time. And a young one, skinny, nervous, kept looking at the holding bay doors like the ship might come through them and eat him. The young one had ink on his hands. Grease, maybe, or ink. I found out later it was both. "It's cursed," I told her. I don't know why I said it. I didn't believe it. I think some part of me wanted to give her a way out. Everyone in this sector knows it. The Threnic ships carry the dead worlds with them. You buy that hull, you buy 111 years of bad luck towed into your hold. The big human snorted, an ugly wet human sound. The small female just looked at me, and she did a thing with her mouth, pulled the corners of it up and back, and I didn't know yet what that meant. I learned. It's called a smile. It looks friendly. It is the single most dangerous thing a human can do. "We don't believe in curses," she said. "Where we come from, we made our own." I should have asked more questions. I think about that. I had her right there. I could have asked, "Who are you? What's your salvage rating? What do you intend to do with a planet killer's skeleton?" I was supposed to ask. There were forms. There were checks. The exchange had rules about who could buy a warship hull, even a gutted one, even a cursed one. But Athok wanted it gone, and the audit was coming, and the dock fees were bleeding us. And here was a little human with a hand-painted ship offering to take my problem away below scrap price, in clean, transferable brokerage credit, no haggling. So I filed it as a decommissioned industrial hull, which it was, technically. The reactors were gone, the weapons were gone. On paper, it was no more dangerous than an empty grain barge. On paper. I ran the transfer. The credit came through clean. The little human signed the manifest with a stylus in her own hand, the way she'd painted her ship's name, by hand, leaving streaks. "Pleasure," she said. "What are you going to do with it?" I asked. Finally, too late, just curiosity by then. She looked back at the holding bay, at the long, oil-dark shape of the V-Hull soon filling the floodlights, drinking the floodlights, the most feared ship of a dead empire reduced to bones I just sold for less than the cost of its metal. "Fix it," she said. That was all. Fix it. Like it was a leaky faucet, like it was a busted hauler, like it was anything other than the corpse of the thing that had once made entire civilizations evacuate their homeworlds at the sight of it in the sky. Then the three of them walked back to their hand-painted ship, and they hooked a tow to the V-Hull soon, and they hauled the bones of a god out of my holding bay and into the dark. I didn't think about them again for 2 years. I want to be honest about that. I didn't lie awake. I didn't have a feeling. I'd sold 1,000 wrecks, and this was just one more, off the books, problem solved, audit passed. Athok stopped sweating, paced at me. Life on Harrow's Drift went back to its gray, grinding nothing. 2 years. Then the news came in about a place called Tarn's Reach. And the whole galaxy stopped laughing at the same time. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what I found out later, because I made it my business after to find out everything. I tracked it. I paid for records. I talked to people who'd been there. I needed to understand what I had handed those humans across my counter, what I had done, what I had let into the dark. I owed the dead that much. I owed myself that much. So I learned the whole thing, piece by piece, the way you peel old paint, and I'm going to give it to you the way it was given to me. The little gray-haired female. Her name was Captain Mara Ide Calloway. She'd flown freight mostly. Cargo runs and the kind of jobs that get good people killed slow. She'd lost a ship once. The limp was from that, a decompression that took half her leg's nerves, and she'd lost a crew with it, and that was the first chance that the second chance was named after losing. The big one was Bryn Oduya. Ex-military, but not the kind of military you'd recognize. Human military back then was a joke to the galaxy. A few system defense boats. A handful of people who knew how to fight wars that no one outside their own little corner had ever heard of. Bren had fought in something humans called the Belt Wars, which to us was nothing, which to them had killed 100,000 people, and he had carried something quiet and heavy out of it that he never put down. And the young one, the nervous one, ink on his hands. His name was Theo Calloway. He was the captain's son. And he was, I would eventually learn, one of the most dangerous minds his species ever produced, not because of what he knew, but because of what he refused to accept. He refused to accept that the Vihal Soon was junk. Here is what humans understood that the rest of us had forgotten. We had stopped building things like the Threnic built things. The galaxy had grown old and lazy. We bought our technology from the brokerage, ready-made, sealed, certified, and we never looked inside the box. Nobody understood their own engines anymore. Nobody could repair their own ships from scratch. If a drive core failed, you didn't fix it, you bought another one. We were a galaxy of people who could use power without understanding it. We had forgotten how to make. Humans hadn't forgotten. Humans had never been given the chance to forget. They'd come up the hard way, the slow way, building everything themselves out of garbage because nobody would sell them the good stuff and they were too poor to buy it anyway. A human salvage crew didn't see a dead Threnic warship and think cursed junk. A human salvage crew saw the most advanced piece of engineering they had ever been allowed to touch, and they thought, we could learn this. We could learn everything this is. And then we could build it ourselves. That's the thing nobody in the galaxy understood about humans. We thought they wanted to use what they bought. They wanted to understand it. There's a difference. The difference is everything. They took the Vihal Soon to a hidden yard. Where exactly, I never fully learned, and the humans have never said. Somewhere out past the dead lanes. A rock with a breathable pocket and a salvage rig, and a few hundred people who'd thrown in with the Callaways on a dream so insane that, looking back, I think only humans could have dreamed it. The dream was this. Take the bones of the most feared warship in the spiral arm, learn how it was made, and then make it live again. Not as it was, better, with everything we know, with everything we are. They didn't have a reactor. The original was long gone, pulled by the first salvagers, and they couldn't buy one. Nobody would sell a Threnic-grade core to humans, and they couldn't afford it anyway. So Theo Calloway, the boy with ink on his hands, did the thing that nobody in the galaxy had done in 1,000 years. He read the dead ship. He crawled through the gutted reactor housing with hand lights and homemade scanners, and he measured the scorch patterns, and he mapped the burned-out conduits, and he reverse-engineered from the shape of the wound what the Threnic core had been and how it had worked. It took him 8 months. He nearly died twice, once from a coolant pocket that had been holding pressure for 111 years, once from sheer exhaustion. His mother found him collapsed in the reactor throat and thought he was dead. He wasn't, he just figured it out. And then the humans built one, not a Threnic core. They couldn't. They didn't have the materials or the magic. They built a human core, cruder, dirtier, held together with their riveted, ugly stubbornness. But they built it to fit the wound the old one had left. They put a human heart in the chest of a dead god. And it beat. I have to stop here. I have to stop because there's a thing I need you to feel, and I don't think you'll feel it if I just keep listing what they did. So stop. Picture it. Picture a species that the entire galaxy agrees is harmless. Backward. A joke. Picture them poor enough that they buy a warship's skeleton for less than scrap, because it's the only warship they'll ever be allowed near. Picture them in a hidden yard, no money, no friends, no fleet, building a heart for a corpse by the light of hand lamps. Because they refuse to accept that something is dead just because everyone says it is. That's what they are. That's the whole thing about them, the thing we missed. They don't accept death as final, not of a ship, not of a person, not of a hope. They will sit in the throat of a dead god for 8 months mapping the shape of its wound because they cannot stand to leave a thing broken. It's not nobility. I don't think it's nobility. I think it might be a kind of madness. But it is the most powerful madness the galaxy has ever encountered, and I sold its first instrument across my counter for the price of metal, and I will carry that to my pyre. 2 years. That's how long the galaxy went on not knowing. 2 years while a few hundred humans on a hidden rock raised a dead warship from the bones up. And in those 2 years, here's what I was doing. Nothing. Selling junk. Drinking something warm. Listening to the recyclers eat the dead. I'd half forgotten the little gray-haired captain and her hand-painted ship. The galaxy hadn't changed. The brokerage still ran everything. The Kells still flexed their old muscle in the inner systems. Humans still got the dirty jobs and the leftover lanes and the laughter. Order. Cold gray order. The kind that feels like it'll go on forever because it has gone on forever because nothing new ever happens at the bottom of the bottom. And then the V-Hall soon came back. The first sign was at Tarn's Reach. Tarn's Reach was a brokerage way station. A big one, a wealthy one. A choke point on 3 trade lanes that the brokerage taxed the life out of. It was guarded by a Kell patrol squadron because the brokerage paid the Kell to be their muscle, the way the rich always pay someone else's children to hold the gun. There'd been a dispute. A human freight collective, small, broke, the usual, had been squeezed by the brokerage at Tarn's Reach over docking rights. Standard. The brokerage squeezed everyone, but they squeezed humans hardest because humans were safe to squeeze. Humans never fought back. Humans took it and bowed and paid and flew their ugly riveted ships home a little poorer. That was the order of things. That was as natural as orbit. The human collective sent word through the proper channels that the squeeze was killing them, that they had families, that they would lose everything. The brokerage answered the way the brokerage always answered. They impounded a human ship. They held a human crew. And they sent a message back, copied to every human registry in the sector that read, I saw the transcript, I kept it, that read, compliance is not optional. You have no standing. You have no fleet. You have no recourse. This is the order of things. You have no fleet. They actually wrote that. You have no fleet, as a fact, as a wall, as the end of the conversation. And out past the dead lanes, on a hidden rock, the V-Hall soon opened its eyes. You have no fleet. I keep coming back to those words. The whole story turns on those 4 words, the way a whole life can turn on one thing somebody said to you when you were young. The brokerage wrote it as a fact, and the strange thing, the thing I've thought about for years now, is that they were right. Humans had no fleet. That part was true. A few system defense boats, a handful of patrol cutters, nothing that could stand against a Kell squadron, let alone the brokerage's full muscle. But here's what the brokerage didn't understand. The same thing I didn't understand across my counter. You don't need a fleet. You need one ship that should be dead and isn't. Let me set the scene at Tarn's Reach, because I want you to be there. I want you to stand on that station deck and feel what they felt. Tarn's Reach was bright. That's the first thing everyone says about it. After the dead gray of places like Harrow's Drift, Tarn's Reach was almost obscene with light. White light, blue light, the spinning colors of 1,000 merchant signs. It was wealthy. It smelled of clean air and expensive food and the faint floral chemicals the brokerage pumped through the vents to make you feel calm and rich and like spending. There was always music. There was always a crowd. The crowd that day was big. There'd been a market festival, one of the brokerage's commercial holidays, and the docking rings were packed with traders and tourists and the bright, soft, well-fed people of the inner systems who had never in their lives been hungry or afraid. Children, even. Little ones holding the hands of their parents, watching the ships come and go through the great curved windows. And in the impound bay, behind a wall of light, sat a human freighter and her crew, locked up, held. The crew were a family. The freighter was called the Marigold, and the family who flew her had named her after a flower from their homeworld, and they were the ones the brokerage had decided to break to make a point. The Kell squadron patrolled the rings. You'd have seen them. Tall, armored, beautiful in the cruel way the Kell are beautiful, walking through the bright crowd with their long guns and their longer reputation. The Kell had been the muscle of the galaxy for 2,000 years. They'd inherited the role from the Threnic in a way. When the hegemony fell, the Kell filled the space the predators left. They were proud. They were disciplined. They were, everyone agreed, the strong ones now. There were 100 of them at Tarn's Reach, maybe more. There was one VHAL soon. It came out of the dark on the festivals last night. The way station's long-range sensors caught it first. A single contact, big, coming in fast on the trade lane, no transponder, no clearance request. The duty officer, a brokerage functionary, flagged it as an unscheduled arrival and pinged it the way you'd ping any latecomer. Identify yourself. State your business. No answer. It kept coming. And as it crossed into the station's near space, and the light of Tarn's Reach finally fell on it, every sensor crew and every window watcher and every Kell soldier on the rings saw the same thing at the same time, and a sound went through that bright crowd that I'm told you could feel in your chest. A Threnic dreadnought, coming out of the dark, after 111 years. You have to understand what that meant to them. To my people, to the Kell, to the old species of the spiral arm. To us, a Threnic dreadnought wasn't a ship. It was a story you told to frighten children. It was the shape of the worst thing that had ever happened to your ancestors. For 3,000 years, that silhouette in the sky had meant the end of the world. And then it had vanished for a century. And now here it was, oil dark and scarred, sliding into the light of the wealthiest station in the sector with its old screaming-face battle scars and its long, low, wicked lines. The crowd panicked. Of course they did. They ran. Parents grabbed children. The music cut out. The bright floral air filled with screaming. And the Kell squadron, and this I'll give them, I'll always give them this. The Kell did not run. They formed up. 100 soldiers of the proudest fighting people in the galaxy formed a line across the docking rings, between the crowd and the impound bay and the thing coming out of the dark, and they raised their long guns, and they held. That's discipline. That's 2,000 years of it. Whatever else I say about the Kell, say also that they stood their ground that night when every instinct they had was screaming at them to run from the silhouette in the sky. The VHAL soon came on. And then close in, where everyone could see, it stopped. It hung there in the near space of Tarn's Reach, filling the great curved windows, and it did not fire. It did not move. It just sat, the way it had sat in my holding bay, drinking the light. And a voice came over every open channel in the station. It was her, the little gray-haired captain, Mara Calloway. I've heard the recording so many times I could speak it with her. She didn't shout. That's the thing people always remark on. She didn't roar threats like a warlord. Her voice was tired and steady and almost gentle, an old freight captain's voice, the voice of someone who has hauled too much for too long and is simply, finally, done being pushed. This is the captain of the VHAL soon, she said. The old name, they'd kept the old name. To the brokerage authority at Tarn's Reach, you're holding a crew, the Marigold, a family. You impounded their ship over docking fees they couldn't pay because you raised the fees to a number nobody could pay. You sent them a message. You said they had no standing. You said they had no recourse. You said, and here her tired voice did something, just slightly, a small human thing. You said they had no fleet. A pause, the whole station holding its breath. You were wrong about the last part, she said. Release them, you have 10 minutes. The brokerage didn't believe it. I understand why. Put yourself in their place. Yes, there's a Threnic dreadnought in the window, but the Threnic are dead. The crew of that thing are humans, backward, harmless, fleetless humans off their hand-painted buckets. The ship has to be a bluff. A salvaged hull with the lights turned on and a paint job. It can't have weapons. Where would humans get Threnic weapons? You can't buy them. You can't build them. The reactor alone. No human could build a reactor that could power Threnic-grade weapons. The whole galaxy knew humans couldn't do that. It was settled. It was a fact. You see the trap. You see exactly the trap. Every true thing the brokerage knew about humans was a wall they built around themselves, and they stood inside that wall feeling safe, and the wall was made of everything they refused to question. The brokerage authority sent back a reply. Smug. I've read it. It told the V-Hall soon to power down and surrender for boarding, on the authority of the brokerage and the guns of the Kell Squadron, and it actually added, a line about how impressive the paint job was. The paint job. Then the Kell Squadron commander, a decorated veteran whose name was Karash Vel, gave the order to advance on the Marigold's impound bay and move the human prisoners deeper into the station, to use them, I think, as leverage, as hostages, to call the bluff. And on the V-Hall soon, Theo Calloway, the boy with ink on his hands, now 2 years older and the gunnery chief of a resurrected god, was watching the Kell soldiers move toward the family in the cage. Here's what humanity had turned the wreck into. I told you they couldn't build a Threnic core. That's true. They built something else. They built a human core, dirty and crude and ugly, and it could not match the Threnic original for elegance. But it could match it for output. It could exceed it. Because humans, you see, build for the worst day. They'd been poor so long and desperate so long and beaten so long that when they finally built a heart for that dead ship, they built it the way a poor man patches a roof, with everything, with too much, with 3 times what's needed, because they could not afford for it to fail. The Threnic built warships like aristocrats, refined, exact, just enough. Humans built this one like refugees. More than enough, far more. An insane and brutal surplus, because just enough is what you build when you've never been truly afraid, and humans had always been afraid. And the weapons. They couldn't buy Threnic weapons, so they studied the burned-out mountings and they built their own, and human weapons were, I have to choose the word carefully, human weapons were unsubtle. The galaxy's weapons were elegant, precise, efficient. Human weapons were the weapons of a species that had spent its whole young, violent history learning that the way to survive a thing bigger than you is to hit it harder than it can possibly imagine and keep hitting it until it stops. They had bolted that philosophy into the chest of a Threnic dreadnought. And the Kell soldiers were walking toward a cage with a family in it. Theo asked his mother for permission to fire. I know this because the bridge recordings came out years later in a hearing. He asked quietly. The boy with ink on his hands asked the tired old captain whether he should kill, and his voice was shaking, because he'd never killed anything, because humans who build things to save them are not mostly people who find killing easy. And Mara Calloway said no. She said no. She said, and I think this is the moment the galaxy should remember, more than the guns, more than the ship, she said. We didn't raise her to kill. We raised her to stop it. And then she did the thing that terrified the galaxy. She fired one shot. Not at the Kell, not at the station, not at the crowd. The V-Hall soon turned, slow and enormous in the great windows, and it aimed out, away from the station, at the empty dark of the trade lane, at nothing, at a derelict navigation buoy 100,000 kilometers off, a dead lump of metal the size of a small moon that had marked that lane for 1,000 years. And it fired once. People who were there described the light differently. Some say white. Some say there was no color, that it was the absence of color, a line of nothing drawn across space. The functionary in the sensor room said his instruments didn't register a weapon discharge at all. They registered something they had no category for, and defaulted to logging it as a stellar event. A star being born, a star dying. The machines could not tell the difference between what the V-Hall soon did and an act of the universe itself. The navigation buoy, a 1,000-year-old monument the size of a moon, was not destroyed. It was gone. Not in pieces, not glowing wreckage. Gone. Where it had been there was empty space and a slowly cooling smear of vapor that the station's instruments tracked for a few seconds and then lost, because there was nothing left coherent enough to track. One shot, from a ship the brokerage had called a paint job, a ship I had sold for the price of its metal, a ship the entire galaxy knew as a fact, knew as a wall, could not possibly be real. And then Mara Calloway's tired, steady, gentle voice came over the channel one more time, into the absolute silence of a station where nobody was breathing. "That was the empty dark," she said. "I picked the empty dark on purpose. The next one won't be empty. You have 8 minutes left. Release them. I want to tell you about Commander Karash Vel. Because this is the part where the Kel soldiers come in, and I don't want you to think they were cowards or fools. They weren't. They were the bravest, most disciplined fighting force in the Spiral Arm, and what happened next happened because of, not in spite of, who they were. Karash Vel had served 40 years. He had a chest full of honors and a reputation for never breaking, never panicking, never running. He had stood his ground that night when the silhouette came out of the dark and held his 100 soldiers in a line, and that was already more than most could do. Now he stood on the docking ring with the heat of a thing that had just unmade a moon-sized buoy still on the wind, with a tired human voice in his ear giving him 8 minutes, with a family in a cage behind him and a panicking crowd behind them, and he had to decide. His orders from the brokerage were clear: hold, advance, use the prisoners, call the bluff. But it wasn't a bluff. The smear of vapor where the buoy had been was not a bluff. He could see it on the windows. Everyone could. And here is the thing about the Kel that the brokerage never understood, the same way nobody understood the humans. The Kel were proud, yes. Disciplined, yes. But underneath the pride and the discipline, the Kel had a code, an old warrior's code, and the first law of that code, older than the brokerage, older than their service, older than the credits they were paid, was this: you do not hide behind the helpless. Karash Vel looked at the cage, at the human family, at the children in it, because the Marigold's crew were a family, and families have children, and there were 2 small ones holding onto their mother through the bars of a brokerage impound cage. His orders were to use them. He lowered his gun. 100 soldiers watched their commander lower his gun, and then, one by one, all down the line, they lowered theirs. Karash Vel walked to the cage. The brokerage functionary was screaming at him over the comm to advance, to comply, to obey, and Karash Vel reached up and switched the comm off, and in the silence he keyed the cage open with his own command override, and he stood aside as the human family came out. The children first, then the parents, blinking in the bright floral light, not understanding yet that they were free. Then he turned and faced the great windows, and the oil-dark shape filling them, and he did a Kel thing, a thing that has no human equivalent, a thing his people do only to acknowledge an enemy they consider worthy. He laid his long gun flat across both his hands and held it out level in front of him. It means I see you. I will not pretend you are less than you are. And on the V-Hall soon, the tired old captain saw it through the windows, and she understood because she'd done her homework, because humans always do their homework, and she returned it the only way she could. She powered down the ship's weapons, all of them, deliberately and openly, where every sensor in the station could see the great dark thing make itself harmless on purpose. 2 old soldiers, one of flesh, one of resurrected steel, acknowledging each other across 111 years and a sky full of light. The family walked free. The crowd slowly stopped screaming. The music did not come back on, but the air, somebody said, felt different, lighter. Like a wall had come down somewhere that everybody had been leaning on without knowing it. The brokerage tried to spin it after. Of course they did. The first reports they pushed out called it a salvage incident, a navigation accident. They said the buoy had failed on its own. They said the V-hull soon was a hoax, a stolen hull, a stunt. They threatened the Kell squadron with charges for dereliction. They threatened the human collective with everything they had. But you can't unfire that shot. You can't unsee a moon-sized monument turned into a cooling smear. 10,000 people saw it. The sensor logs were everywhere within a day, copied and recopied, impossible to recall. And the worst part for the brokerage, the part that truly broke them, was HFY. Because HFY did not let them spin it. He filed a report, an honest one. A Kell veteran of 40 years stood before a brokerage inquiry and told them plainly that he had received an order to hide behind helpless prisoners, that he had refused it, that he would refuse it again, and that the ship in the window had been real and had chose with full power, with a moon-sized hole in space to prove it could do otherwise, not to kill anyone. It could have ended us all, he said in the words that everyone now knows. 111 years ago, the thing that ship used to be would have. It didn't. The hand on the trigger had changed. That is the only thing that matters here. The hand had changed. The brokerage tried to bury his testimony. It didn't bury, it spread. It spread the way water spreads, finding every crack. And out past the dead lanes, the V-hull soon turned and went home, with a freed family flying escort in a flower-named freighter. And behind it the whole settled cold gray order of the galaxy began, very quietly, to come apart. Because every human registry in the sector had heard the message. You said they had no fleet. You were wrong about the last part. And every poor, squeezed, beaten, harmless species who'd ever bowed and paid and flown home a little poorer had heard it too. And they all of them, started doing the same math at the same time. If a few hundred humans on a hidden rock could raise a dead god from the bones with no money and no friends, and nothing, but the refusal to accept that a broken thing has to stay broken, then what was a wall really? What was a fact really, if humans could just decide not to believe it and build their way through? I heard about Tarn's Reach the way everyone heard about it. The logs came across my console at Harrow's Drift, one gray shift, flagged as a curiosity, a salvage sector oddity. Decommissioned industrial hull involved in incident at Tarn's Reach. Decommissioned industrial hull. I had written those words on the manifest. I had filed the V-hull soon as a decommissioned industrial hull, and the phrase had followed it all the way to Tarn's Reach, and now it sat on my screen like an accusation. I opened the logs. I watched the buoy disappear. And I sat at my counter in the burnt metal ozone air, with the recyclers grinding away at the dead. And I remembered a little gray-haired human putting both hands flat on this same counter and telling me she wanted the bones of a god. What are you going to do with it? Fix it. I had laughed almost. I had almost laughed in her face. I did not laugh now.